wake me up to another good morning. Time to go.
Are you ready to explore God's wild and wonderful world? Welcome to the Nat Theo podcast. I'm your host, Erin Lynham. I'm a certified master naturalist, Bible teacher, and author. And I am so excited to dive into God's written word, the Bible, and his created world with you. Have you ever noticed how many different colors leaves on a tree can be? What are some of the colors that you can think of that are sometimes on leaves? Depending on where you live, trees might change into all kinds of colors at different times of the year, mostly in the fall. Tree leaves might be red, yellow, orange, or even purple or blue colored. But how and why do leaves change colors? And why can leaves change into so many different colors? That's what we are exploring today. Now, this time of year in November, the leaves have probably mostly fallen off the trees. And that's why next week we're going to look at the very important jobs leaves have to do even after they fall off a tree. We'll look at all the creatures that still use those leaves and need those leaves when they're on the forest floor. But today, let's look at why and how leaves change color and fall off a tree in the first place. Listener, I found a really fun experiment that you can do in your own yard to see the different colors of leaves. This experiment is free and it is by Apologia Curriculum. I will link to that experiment in the show notes and in our Nat Theo Club lesson guide. I love all of the science experiments by Apologia Curriculum because they help my kids and me better see, experience, and understand God's wild and wonderful world while we enjoy fun, hands-on activities. My oldest son was studying Apologia's general science class, and he had a lemon sitting on the counter in which he had cut little tiny slits and inserted copper pennies. He was so excited to check back on them later and find that the acid inside the lemon had cleaned all of his pennies and made them look brand new. He learned all about God's design of citric acid with a simple lemon and pennies. Check out Apologia's curriculum and online classes at apologia.com, and be sure to click the link in the show notes to enjoy their experiment with fall leaves. I think we all enjoy seeing the beautiful colors of trees in the fall, but it's even more enjoyable and amazing as we begin to understand why those colors are there and how God designed trees and leaves with very important jobs and processes. Here's our trail map for today. We are going to learn what is a forest biome and what are coniferous and deciduous trees. We will learn what is the job of a tree leaf and why do trees lose their leaves, as well as why do leaves change colors? And finally, how can we let others around us see God's beauty inside of us? Have you ever heard anyone say, the days are getting shorter? You might hear someone say that as we move toward the months of winter. What they usually mean is that there is less sunlight in a day. It gets darker and darker out earlier. You might notice that in the summer you can stay outside and play late into the evening because it's still light out. But in winter, it's a bit different. It gets darker earlier, even as early as dinner time. Although trees don't have brains, they can in a way notice when there begins to be less sunlight in the day. Now, they are not exactly doing math. They're not counting the minutes of sunlight in a day. But when they receive less and less sunlight each day, they begin preparing for fall and going through the processes that we are going to learn about today. Now, although trees don't actually count the minutes of sunlight, it is important for us as humans with brains and important work to do to understand math. You see, scientists do count the minutes of sunlight and other important measurements in nature to better understand the world around us. You too can learn important math skills that will help you in nature study and science. My kids are practicing those skills with CTC Math, which helps them learn and master math skills in a quick, efficient, and effective manner. I love that their lessons pack in solid math lessons in a short time so we can master math and then still have plenty of time to run outside to play and explore in nature. Explore CTC Math's lessons and enjoy a week free at ctcmath.com. All right, listener, here is our trivia question. What is a tree called that keeps its green leaves all year round? Take a guess and we will find out at the end of today's lesson. So let's look first at a forest biome and what exactly that is. There are many, many trees in the world. God definitely displayed his creativity. He did not hold back when he filled the earth with all kinds of different trees in different areas across the world. Very different kinds of trees grow in the jungle than the trees that grow in the desert. And still different are the trees that grow next to the ocean and the trees that grow on the tops of mountains. Different trees have different needs, and God has met those needs in each tree's biome. Have you ever heard that word, biome? You can think of a biome like a big zone or area. A biome is a large area on Earth that has a certain climate, like weather patterns and temperatures, and is home to certain living things. God designed all different kinds of biomes for different trees to thrive and do well in. I love that when we study nature, we can see all the many ways that God cares for what he has made. Of course, we live on a planet that is cursed by sin. And because of that, many of these natural processes and God-given systems in nature are unfortunately broken. However, we can still see so many glimpses of God's original design and how he meets the needs of the creatures and the plants that he has created. And one creative way he did that is through healthy biomes. The specific biome or area we will learn about today is a deciduous forest biome. But what is that word deciduous? When we talk about trees, we can organize them into two main categories, coniferous and deciduous. The first, coniferous, gives us a little bit of a clue in its name, cone, coniferous. Coniferous trees make cones, like pine cones. Coniferous trees also have needles. Picture a pine tree. That is a coniferous tree. The needles on a coniferous pine tree, those are actually its leaves, although they look very different from normal tree leaves that we might paint or color on a sheet of paper. But pine needles are indeed leaves. Almost all coniferous trees keep their leaves or their needles all year round. So coniferous trees make cones and they have needles, which are their special leaves. And most coniferous keep those needles all year round. But what about that second big category of trees, deciduous trees? Deciduous trees are leafy trees. Most of them lose their leaves in the fall. In fact, that word deciduous means falling off. However, you might have noticed that some leafy deciduous trees still have their leaves in winter. They are not bright green like they are in the summer, but the leaves are a faded brown color, and yet they're still clinging to the branches of the tree. Some deciduous trees, like some oak tree species, hold on to their leaves through the winter and actually shed them in the spring, when new tree buds are forming and push off those withered leaves. When a deciduous tree holds onto its leaves through the winter and sheds them in the spring, this process is called marcescence. Marcescence comes from the Latin word meaning to fade. And that's exactly what these leaves do. As they're clinging to those branches, they are fading. They fade and wither, but they remain attached to the tree branch. But eventually, they still fall off, and so they are still deciduous trees that lose their leaves. So now that we know a few of these big words, what do you think a deciduous tree biome is? Well, remember, a deciduous tree, that word deciduous means falling off. It is a tree that loses its leaves. And a biome is a large area on Earth with a certain climate or weather and temperature that supports certain living things. So a deciduous forest biome is a large area with lots of deciduous trees. This biome is normally moist and has 4 seasons, including a rainy spring and a hot summer and a cool fall and a cold, snowy winter. I grew up in the state of Wisconsin, where we had many deciduous trees. I was very used to seeing the trees change colors and those leaves fall off the trees in the fall and as we headed into winter. And I would rake up those leaves into big piles and jump into them. Have you ever done that? It's a lot of fun. But why exactly do deciduous trees lose their leaves? To answer that question, it might be important to first understand why a tree has leaves in the first place. Have you ever seen a tree eating a hamburger or snacking on an apple or maybe enjoying a popsicle? Of course not. But where does a tree get its food? Do they have mouths? No. A tree actually makes its own food. In a way, trees are like chefs. But how do they make their food? They need a very important ingredient: sunshine. Trees take in energy from the sun. They do this through their leaves. Their leaves are kind of like sponges that soak in energy from the sun, and then they can turn the sun's energy into food for the tree. Do you know what that process is called? It's a big word that starts with photo. Photosynthesis. Photo means light. So photosynthesis, this process of the tree leaves, begins with light, sunlight. And synthesis means putting together. So photosynthesis is when plants use the sunlight to put things together inside of them to create their own food. This is the main job of tree leaves, to perform this incredible photosynthesis process that God designed so that the tree can make its own food and keep growing. You know, in a similar way, we can use the light of God's truth to put things together in our hearts and our minds and to keep growing. One way my family does this is through great books and resources that help us think about God's goodness and truth. I like to find those books and resources at christianbook.com. Their online and print catalogs are full of great book selections that help me find new things for my kids to read, things that I know will help my children soak in God's light, like tree leaves soak in sunlight, so my kids can keep growing in God's goodness. If you are looking for great Christian resources to help you keep soaking in the light of God's truth and keep growing in faith, check out christianbook.com. So if leaves are so important for a tree, if they help a tree soak in sunlight and make food and keep growing, why do trees lose their leaves? Don't they need to keep eating and growing? Well, yes. But they also take a long nap in winter. Many trees go dormant in cold months. Dormant means something is not active or growing, but it could become active and keep growing in the future. When a tree goes dormant, it's kind of like it's taking a long nap. They stop doing a lot of things, including that photosynthesis process, and they stop actively growing. It's important for a tree to shed or lose its leaves before it goes dormant. Why do you think that might be? Let's look quickly at 4 reasons that a deciduous tree needs to shed its leaves before going dormant in cold months. One reason is because the tree does not need to photosynthesize anymore. It doesn't need to take in the sun's energy during that time. It's not actively growing, so it doesn't need to make food. A second reason is because letting go of its leaves lets the tree conserve or save water inside of it so that it can keep growing in the spring when things warm up. Trees normally lose water through their leaves through a process called transpiration. Transpiration is when a tree drinks in water through its roots from the soil, and then it lets that water go up into the atmosphere through its leaves. Transpiration is another important job that God gave trees to do. But in the winter, trees need to hold onto and save water. So, by dropping their leaves, they're no longer losing water through their leaves. They can save it for when they need it. A third reason that trees shed their leaves is that by dropping their leaves, trees can save energy and food because they don't need to take care of those leaves or grow new leaves through the winter. Fourth and finally, a tree can protect itself from damage by losing its leaves. Remember that in a deciduous forest biome, it can be very cold and snowy in the winter. Cold and freezing temperatures and ice can do a lot of damage to tree leaves. And then the tree has to spend really important energy to heal from that damage. By dropping its leaves, a tree can stay safer and healthier through the winter. Now that we understand why deciduous trees lose their leaves, let's discover why those leaves change into so many beautiful colors before they fall off. Trees do not have brains. They cannot think, but they can sense what is going on around them and respond to those changes. One of those changes is how much sunlight there is in a day. Just like we talked about earlier when someone says the days are getting shorter because there's less sunlight. As the days move toward fall and there's less sunlight, a tree begins its process of losing leaves and preparing for winter. One thing the tree will do is create a block right where the leaf's stem attaches to the branch. This way, the tree is no longer feeding and taking care of those leaves, and they can begin to dry out and then drop off the tree. When the tree creates this block between the leaf and the branch, the colors in the leaf begin to change. This is because the green color in the leaf is from something called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the green pigment or color in tree leaves. Chlorophyll not only makes leaves green, but is very, very important in that process of photosynthesis. Chlorophyll allows the tree to take in the energy from the sun. But we saw that in the winter, trees no longer need to perform that photosynthesis. They no longer need that green chlorophyll pigment. And so, when the tree creates that block between the leaf and the branch, that green chlorophyll starts breaking down. So it's not so much that the tree leaves are changing colors, but that we no longer see the green chlorophyll. And this means that other colors that we couldn't see before begin to show through. You see, tree leaves don't only have green chlorophyll. Many tree leaves have other pigments or colors. These pigments include one called xanthophyll, which makes a leaf yellow, and another pigment called carotenoids, which can make a leaf orange. Some leaves can even turn a fiery red color, but this is a very different process. That fiery red color is caused by sugars trapped in the tree leaf. Those sugars turn into a whole new pigment or color called anthocyanin, which is red. You might also see brown leaves, and this happens when there's an early freeze. Have you ever had a very unexpected cold day in the fall? Maybe it was really warm the day before, and then you wake up and there's frost on the ground and it's really chilly. This can happen at any point in the process of a leaf changing color, and it can stop that process and turn the leaf brown. Think about those colors that are always in a leaf, that yellow and orange color, but we cannot see them until the green chlorophyll begins to break down. When I first learned about this process, I was amazed that although people often talk about trees changing color, that's not very accurate. Instead, the trees are showing their colors that were there all along. Think about if a tree's leaves tried to hold on to that green chlorophyll color and never turn other colors. People wouldn't get to see their full beauty, and it wouldn't be good for the tree. Listeners, when we follow Jesus as our Savior, God lives inside of us. His Holy Spirit is inside our spirit. His beauty is inside of us. But sometimes we might be tempted to hide him. Maybe friends of ours don't understand why we believe in God, or people might even make fun of what we believe. But just as a tree reveals what is inside its inner God-given beauty and what God made it to be, we can show our true selves and who we are as followers and children of God. We don't have to hide anything. When I think about someone trying to hide God, I often think of Peter in the Bible, right before Jesus died on the cross to save us from our sins. One of his closest followers, Peter, denied him 3 times and said that he didn't even know Jesus, even though he had spent the past few years following Jesus closely. Peter had given up his life and his work to follow Jesus, and yet, now in this moment, he was denying Jesus. He was like a tree holding onto that green chlorophyll, onto those green leaves, not wanting others around him to see the beauty of God inside. Why do you think Peter did this? He was afraid of what others around him might think about him if they knew he followed Jesus. Let's read what happened in Luke 22, verses 54 to 62. So they arrested him. They arrested Jesus and led him to the high priest's home. And Peter followed at a distance. The guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat around it. And Peter joined them there. A servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. Finally, she said, "This man was one of Jesus' followers." But Peter denied it. "Woman," he said, "I don't even know him." After a while, someone else looked at him and said, "You must be one of them." "No, man, I am not," Peter retorted. About an hour later, someone else insisted, "This must be one of them because he is a Galilean too." But Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. At that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Suddenly, the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." And Peter left the courtyard, weeping bitterly. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, even with Jesus right there close by. And then, did you catch what happened at the end? Peter wept bitterly. He cried very hard because he was extremely sad and he regretted what he had done. But do you know what is beautiful about this story? God was working in Peter's heart and mind. God was prompting Peter not to be ashamed of Jesus, but to share God's love with many, many other people. Around 50 days later, after Jesus returned to heaven, Peter and his friend John were courageously telling many people all about Jesus. But the leaders in the city were not very happy about this, and they were trying to arrest Peter and John. Peter stood before them and boldly said these words in Acts 4:20. "We cannot keep quiet. We must speak about what we have seen and heard." Listener, this was the same Peter who had denied Jesus 3 times. Now he was boldly letting God's love and truth shine through him, like a tree revealing its God-given beauty, not hiding behind its green chlorophyll, but revealing what God made it to be. Think about the big change that God made in Peter's life, the boldness that God gave him. God can give us the same courage to tell others about God. If you are ever afraid of letting people see God inside of you, remember Romans 1:16. "I am not ashamed of the good news, because it is the power God uses to save everyone who believes." Others around you need that good news. They need the good news that you have inside, that Jesus loves them and died to save them. Never keep that message hidden inside, but let God use you to share it with others. Do you remember our trivia question? What is a tree called that keeps its green leaves all year round? We learned earlier in today's lesson that a coniferous tree has cones and needles are its leaves, and that most keep their needles all year round. This is why many of those coniferous trees are called evergreen, because they are evergreen. They're always green. They do not shed or drop their needles. So a coniferous tree that holds its needles and does not shed them is an evergreen tree. However, not all coniferous trees are evergreen. There are some species that do shed their needles, such as the tamarack tree. Now it's your turn to explore. Go find some coniferous and deciduous trees. Study their pine needles or leaves. Draw different leaf shapes and see if you can find a guidebook from your library or a bookstore, or with permission, use an app like iNaturalist to identify what trees you are finding. Thank you for listening to this episode of Nat Theo. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to share it with a friend and subscribe, rate, and review Nat Theo wherever you listen. Tune in next week as we look at why those leaves are so important even after they fall to the ground. As always, until next time, listener, keep exploring God's wild and wonderful world.